Welcome to Dashing Dan's Olympic Adventures. This is our second episode, thanks to Aussie Home Loans. Great to have them on board. And our second guest, after having Glenn Mitchell last week, legendary sports broadcaster, is an Olympic gold medalist from Sydney in 2000. Very emotional time for him and his family, and also for the man that he rode with in the Madison. It was the first ever time that the Madison was an Olympic event. We're talking, of course, of Scott Mcgrory, who now is a very respected commentator and will be part of the host broadcaster at the Paris Olympics in a few weeks' time. Scott, I really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us on Dashing Dan's Olympic Adventures.
Oh, my pleasure, Dan. And look, you don't have to persuade me too much to talk about the Olympic Games, especially being an Olympic year and the excitement that is around going over to Paris to commentate. So I'm really excited about it all.
Are you as excited still as you were when you were competing?
It's a different. I say yes, but no, because look, it's a little bit different. There's a little bit more at stake, when you're putting in all those hard hours and days and weeks of months and years of training and all conditions, etc. There's a different type of nervousness that comes with that. But for me, I understand the privileged position I'm in to still be able to work within sport and the sport in particular that I love in cycling. That I have reached out to a couple of other sports in commentary before and will continue to do so. And I did the Winter Olympics commentary for Channel 9 a couple of years ago, and we'll be doing that again in 2 years' time. But to go across to Paris at the Olympic Games, look, it's everybody's dream, isn't it? If you're into sport, you want to be there at the venues, and I get to do that. So I am almost as excited as lining up there on the velodrome itself.
Just on the commentary side and learning other sports, how much of a challenge has that been? Or for someone who loves his sport and understands elite sport, has it not been as difficult as you thought it might be?
Look, the sport is sport. So commentary, as long as you've got an understanding of how that sport normally is portrayed in commentary, and you understand the craft of commentary, then it's not that difficult. It's more about the research, knowing the rules of that sport, the participants, the correct pronunciations for the stars of the sport, things like that. So when it came to doing the Winter Olympics last time, there was a lot of research that went into it to make sure I understood just the technical nature of the sport. Now, at the Olympics themselves, no matter what the sport is really, there's only probably 10% of the audience that are true experts. Yes. It's the 90% that are just watching those particular sports for the first time, which is often the case. So you might not get too many things wrong or get found out that you're getting too many things wrong, but you still want to do the sport and the fans of that particular sport due respect. So I always do my due diligence, and I did ice skating or speed skating, the last ones, and the Dutch are typically the dominant force in that particular, long track speed skating discipline. So I made sure I reached out to old cycling friends of mine and sent through some of the tricky names that I needed them to be pronounced correctly. I watched the Dutch speed skating championships to listen to the commentary and how they commentated their own sport and how they pronounced the skaters' names. So, I do a lot of that in the lead up to a sport that I don't know much about.
Was there, excuse my ignorance here, was it sort of a touch of similarity between the speed skating and the cycling going around the velodrome and, of course, the speed skating as well? Did you find that a bit or not really?
It's incredibly similar, and I didn't really think about it too much until I started doing it. It's the nature of most of the disciplines. There's only one bunch race or mass start event at the Olympics in speed skating, but all the others are two skaters on the track. It's virtually like an individual pursuit, which we don't have in the Olympics anymore, but very similar to track cycling disciplines. So, and I actually I pulled myself up a couple of times because I called them riders instead of skaters a couple of times. And then the third time I did it, I had a bit of a chuckle to myself. But yeah, it really, really similar, which is the main reason that it was Channel 7 that had the last games. And one of the main reasons they put me into that particular sport after I asked to do it, because they saw the similarities between cycling. But, and then I watch AFL now, or, AFL is sort of the football code that I like the most. And I wonder whether I could do that. It's probably too late for me to make the transition, but I do look at it and think, oh, I probably should have got into AFL commentary or another footy code earlier on, because, I just enjoy talking about sport.
Did you ever think you'd go down this path once your career ended as an elite cyclist?
I wasn't sure. Yeah, look, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And then, and I've always kind of, I guess, been known as someone that has a bit of a gift of the gab, and can tell a story. So once I got into it, I felt pretty much at home, and I just enjoy it, and for me, it's not just about, because what you do, I find I get sick of my own voice sometimes, and especially when I commentate events or sports solo. By the end of it, I'm thinking, gee, the people at home must be sick of my voice. I am. I've been listening to it for so bloody long. So I much prefer to do it with someone else, so you can have more of a conversation and, change the tone and the highs and the lows. But I just do enjoy it. I really get into it. And I like learning about, when I say the craft of the sport, trying to put in the technical nature for the few people that are truly experts, but not too much. And then trying to educate the audience, so especially for an Olympics broadcast, educate the audience that might be watching that sport or that event for the first time in 4 years since the previous Olympics. So give them an education so they're learning as they're watching it, but without trying to patronize the true experts of the sport. And there's a real balance to that. It can be quite difficult, but I enjoy the challenge of doing that.
Olympic gold medalist Scott Mcgrory has joined me in Dashing Dan's Olympic adventures, thanks to Aussie Home Loans. Their areas of expertise as they deal with anyone in Australia. They've got clients in every state and every capital. They do Zoom as well, include purchasing a property, owner-occupied or investment, building a property portfolio, refinancing, and also debt consolidation. 2 Olympic Games, one as a teenager, one as a guy who was 30 years old, who'd been involved in a family tragedy, which we'll get to in just a second. What was it like being a teenager and being part of the 4,000 metres team pursuit that had won gold in 1984 and basically were the hunted in 88?
Yeah, it's really intriguing. When I step back from myself and my own career and look at those 2 games, they were two very different people, that represented an 18-year-old kid. I had no idea. Like, I truly didn't understand at that age, which is very different to today's 18, 19, 20-year-olds that are into professional cycling. They're so better educated about their bodies, their nutrition, and how to perform well. We didn't back then, and I certainly didn't. I was a kid that came from Queensland, grew up on the Gold Coast, won lots of races as a youngster. It seemed pretty easy, made the national team. The next year happened to be the Olympics, made the team pursuit team and went off to the games. And it all seemed far easier than what it's supposed to be. And we came away with the bronze medal. Even though we had won gold, the guys had won gold 4 years earlier. It was a different scenario. That was with the Soviet bloc boycott in 1984. So they were missing the Soviet Union, East Germany, the Czech Republic. There was a couple other, big, strong nations from team pursuing that didn't go to the games in 84. And, the Aussies come away with the gold medal. They beat the American team, which were clearly the favourites. So it was a fantastic victory. And then 4 years later, the Soviets, the East Germans, they were all back. So we actually were told by our coach going into those games that we should be looking to try and finish third. A bronze medal is what was the goal that we'd really set ourselves. So when we achieved that, we felt like we'd really won. We did everything we thought we could. Now I look back on that now and think, well, maybe if we kept training every single day thinking we could still win, maybe we would have gone a little bit better. I don't know. But it wasn't until after the games that I really got an understanding of what it truly does take to get to the Olympics. Normally, it was for me, it was quite unusual to go to a games with really not understanding what it's supposed to take and how hard it's supposed to be. And look, I missed the next Olympics. I didn't get selected for 92. I didn't even bother to try out for 96. So it was 12 years later that I got to go to my next games. And by then I was a very different person, very much a different adult and an athlete, much more mature. And I truly by then understood how hard it is to be at that level and get another chance to go to an Olympics.
How gut-wrenching was it, considering you'd been a bronze medalist in 88 to miss out in 92? And then why didn't you bother in 96?
Well, look, I was really disappointed. I truly felt that I was So I had gone out of the team, and I had a falling out with the coach at the time, and personality clash. I was too young and immature to really understand my role in that. And then I was asked to come back into the training program for the 92 games. And I'd made a commitment to myself to do everything that was asked of me, train my ass off, and just really work hard to be back into the team. And I truly felt like I had done that. But it turned out later that the coach didn't have any indication or any inclination of wanting to put me into the team. He really just wanted me to bolster the numbers in training and make the training environment more competitive. So to the point where the top two riders in that team, my teammates, friends, and peers, they told me after the selection that if they had selected the team themselves, they would have put me at number 3 or number 4, and 8 riders were chosen out of the original 12, and I wasn't one of them. So, that was really disappointing for me. So I was quite disillusioned after that and didn't want to be involved with the track program at that level ever again. So 96, I didn't even try because I knew that same coach wouldn't bother to select me. Whether I was good enough or not, it didn't matter. I just knew he wouldn't select me. And then, I started a professional career, lived in Europe, started doing Madison racing in Europe as a professional. And by the time the Sydney Olympics came around, the Madison had been included into the games for the first time. And I was the most qualified and most experienced Australian in that field or in that particular discipline. So the same coach, came back to me and asked me if I would come back in and help the team qualify through the World Championships to get into the Olympics, which I said yes to because I wanted to obviously ride the games myself. And the rest is history. I told him, look, there's a lot of issues that I had with him previously, but I'm a different person now. I'm an adult. I'm a professional. It's all water under the bridge. Let's move forward and win gold.
No names, no pack drills, but I think you know who I'm talking about. Did the coach play favourites?
Oh, yeah, always.
Why?
And
Why
in
though?
an unfair way. So look, sometimes I guess it's just easier. And look, the favourites, when you say play favourites, it often wasn't like for like. So whoever the best person was or the best rider at the time was the favourite, and they got special treatment. But if he didn't like you or if he didn't think you were slightly good enough or whatever, then he made it really difficult for you to survive in that environment. So, and most of the riders that left, and I'm one of the very few that was able to then pick myself up and go on and be successful. Most of the riders that left the program back then disappeared. And I truly think that that's what he wanted, was for them to not, pop back up again. Now, a better scenario, of course, would be to leave them wanting more, let them know that perhaps they didn't fit the program, but they're still a good athlete. There's still perhaps a profession for them within the sport somewhere. Keep training, keep working hard. And who knows, in the future, you might come back and be a part of the team. And then if they did come back, then he can claim that as his success. But it wasn't that case. Most of the riders that left the program or were kicked out left the sport completely. So I was a little bit unusual in that regard, that I did continue on and have some success.
Did you do it in spite of him in some ways, Scott, if you don't mind me asking? In coming back into the team and winning that gold medal, you were determined to prove him wrong?
Oh, not so much him. It was more for me. Really was more for me. And there were times when you sit down and think about it and think, oh yeah, stuff whoever. But it's too hard a sport, and this goes for so many sports. Throw in triathlon and rowing and marathon athletics. There's so many difficult sports that that kind of motivation I don't think gets you up every morning to do all the hard work and the hard training. There'd be moments in training where you think, yeah, I'm proving people wrong. But in general, I think you've got to have that inner drive yourself to get yourself up every day to do the hard yards. It's too hard a sport. And I say this to some of the younger athletes as well. And they start talking about the money that's earned in some other sports compared to some of the Olympic sports. And you look at, say Europeans, soccer, football, golf, tennis, these sports. None of the top athletes in any of those sports are motivated by the money. That's not why they're doing it. It's too hard to get yourself out of bed every single day to train as much as they do, regardless of the sport, because there's a paycheck at the end of it. people don't at the top level do not participate at that level because of the financial benefits. It's because of their own passion and drive to be the best they can be.
Australia went 16 years without winning a track Olympic gold medal, 84, the pursuit team, then you and Brett winning the Madison in 2000. Did that have a lot to do with the coaching structure, without going on too much about that? Shane Kelly should have won and would have won in 96, of course, but his foot fell out of the pedal.
Yeah. Yeah, true. Yeah, and there are lots of situations like that. Yeah, that was that was incredible. Shane's a very good friend of mine, so that often comes up in conversation, especially when you're talking about the Olympics and different disciplines. And that was a travesty, wasn't it? I guess at some point, and I'm not pointing fingers at that lack of wins to the coaching staff. We had a really solid program. Like, there was an incredibly strong structure and program that we had since '84 through to sort of late 2000s that did bring a lot of success. I think there were some other factors that came into it as well, but not just purely coaching. I think for sure there would have been a role to play there. I think the system changed after 2000, and we had immediate success. If you go through to 2004, we won 6 gold medals at the Olympics in cycling in general. So yeah, there was an immediate change once that the coaching hierarchy moved. So I think there is something to be said about that, but I wouldn't put it all onto the coaching staff. No.
You in favour of the centralised program, or do you think if someone's good enough? And that was the debate too at the time. I remember being in Perth working for the ABC, Scott and Glenn Mitchell, who was on the program last week, legendary cycling commentator. He was against the centralised program, that if you were good enough living in your home state and you were more comfortable living in your home state, you shouldn't have to move to Adelaide. What was your view on all of that?
Yeah. Oh, I don't disagree with that. I think a centralised hub can work. It does work. It has worked, but it shouldn't be exclusive. If a rider doesn't want to be there, and what they do now is the Adelaide is still the center of our high performance program, but the athletes can come in and out. They don't have to be there the whole time, especially the track endurance riders, the sprinters. It's a little bit different with our sprint program because they're so dependent on doing specific strength and weight training every day, particular track sessions. So they do a lot more specific work where they need to be with a strength and conditioning coach and their pure track sprint coach. So they kind of need to be all together at the same place more often. But I was part of the track endurance program, and these days they just come in for training camps. They go home, have their it's for their own well-being. It's great to be home around family and friends, and then just go in for these training camps. And I think that's created a much better program. And I see now with the AIS in Canberra, big funding boost has come back to the program there as well. So that'll be interesting to see how they spend that money for the best benefit of the sports. I think for some sports it might be better to be in a centralized program, but for others, I think decentralized certainly can work as well. Yeah.
Olympic gold
and
medalist.
if you don't make it, yeah, I don't think anyone should be excluded from it. Now, I think if you're good enough, you're good enough. You should be in, as long as you can get a certain amount of time. So for my sport, particular periods throughout the year where you can be there to actually prove that you are good enough, or you have the skill level that's required to compete in a national team at the Olympic Games, say in a team pursuit, which is quite technical, or in a Madison, which is even more technical. You have to be able to prove that to the coach. You have to be able to demonstrate that in training over a period of time, but not necessarily 12 months. So I don't think people outside the program should be excluded.
Olympic gold medalist Scott Mcgrory is my guest on Dashing Dan's Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loan. And Aussie Home Loan can deal with anyone in Australia. They've got clients in every state and every capital, and they do Zoom as well. And they've got over 25 lenders as well. Now, Scott, as you said, you got into the Madison. Why the Madison? Was it something you're always interested in?
It is, actually. So I as a kid growing up on the Gold Coast, I ordered online. Well, not online. I ordered through the mail. Must have been through a bike magazine back then. Some VHS videos of European races, and one of the things I was really intrigued with was the European 6-day racing scene. And we had one of the absolute greatest of all time that participated in that, Danny Clark from Tasmania. And so I started watching these VHS videos. I had the World Championships, track and road. I had the British Kellogg's Criterium series on another VHS cassette, and I had a few of the European track races, the 6-day events. So I was fascinated from the age of sort of 14, 15, 16 about those particular events. And I started racing Madisons quite young, in my teens as well, and won the Queensland and the New South Wales state championships against the seniors, or the elites, as we call them these days, but as a junior. So I was asked by a friend of mine, Mark Victor, who was a senior rider, to ride with him in those championships, and we won. So I was pretty good at it right from the start. That was at the age of 16, 17, not even up in the senior age category. So I showed good ability in that kind of discipline. And the Madison, as hectic as it looks, anyone we get to watch it at the games this year, it does look quite hectic, but it takes some real thought process. In a normal race on the track, you have to think maybe 2 laps ahead to make sure you're in the right position. Whereas with the Madison, you have to be thinking 5 to 6 laps ahead because of the nature of the race with the changeover between the riders, like a relay format. So therefore, you have to be strong, you have to be fast, but you also have to be quite intelligent in that kind of discipline. And I feel like I had that right from the start. So once I got into the European scene and started racing the European 6-day events myself, after watching those videos as a kid, I excelled at it, and I just loved it. I was intrigued by it. I was intrigued by the tactics within that discipline, where you can almost force your opponents to waste energy while you can save energy and then attack them later. And I really like that chess game, which is pretty effectively, it is like it's a game of chess on wheels at 180 beats per minute. And I just really embraced trying to outsmart my opponents as much as possible. And even if you weren't the best team or riders on the track, there's still a way often to get a result and finish in the top 3, top 4, top 5, even if you might on paper be the 5th, 8th, 10th team on the track. And I really took to that. I was intrigued by it.
So how frustrating was it that it wasn't an Olympic event? And did you know that it was coming to Sydney in 2000? How far out did you know about that?
Well, it wasn't frustrating because it was never been in the Olympics. We never thought, maybe didn't think it would be. And it might have been, so 96 Olympics, there was no talk about it. Then it might have been around 90, maybe towards the end of 1998, going into 99 is when they first started talking about the Olympics coming in for the Madison coming in for the first time. And my dilemma was, I didn't have a relationship with the national coach, yet I knew that I was the best qualified or the most experienced in that particular discipline to be able to ride for Australia. So I wanted to call at some point at the start of 1999. I knew I had to make a phone call to the coach to say, hey, look, I want to be in this team. I think I'm good enough to be there for this. You don't have experienced Madison riders in your squad at the moment. You need someone like me. And the qualification for the Olympics was at the World Championships in Berlin in 99. So that was, I think it was September or October 1999 was the qualifying event. So I needed to talk, good 6 months before the World Championships to the coach just to try and get myself into the squad. Now, before I made that call, he called me. So he'd already gone through all the different disciplines and was looking to identify the riders that would qualify the maximum quota spots for the Olympics through the World Championships in Berlin. And when we got to the Madison, because I was a professional in that particular discipline, he penciled my name down as someone that he did need to talk to. So he called me and asked me, not if I'd ride the Olympics, but if I would ride the World Championships to therefore hopefully get a reasonable result and qualify the 2 spots required to ride the Madison at the Olympic Games, so, which of course I jumped at. So absolutely love to do it.
So it was all about qualifying the team, not so much qualifying the rider. A little bit like rowing, you've got to qualify the boat, don't you? And then you pick your team afterwards. So obviously the coach, and just on that, how surprised were you? We've touched on this a bit, but how surprised were you when he rang you? No doubt you would have been a bit nervous, thinking, I've got to ring him. I've got to find a way to ring him, knowing the relationship wasn't great. But when he rang you, was there a feeling of relief?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Look, I was over the moon, delighted and relieved in that that I felt like it was a little victory for me, that I didn't have to go back to him with my tail between my legs. It was like, good, right, okay, that's done now. He did that. So I give him credit for for making that call in the first place. So yeah, it was great. And then we had a meeting, and I brought it up, and this is the difference, I guess, between an 18-year-old kid that didn't know what he was doing to a 30-year-old or 29-year-old mature athlete by this point. And I said, look, there's been a lot of water under the bridge. As far as I'm concerned, I don't care about that. We're here for a different goal. We're different people, a different time in our careers. And it's a home Olympic Games. I feel that I'm qualified to get a great result for Australia. We'd already spoken about teaming up with Brett Aiken, which was by far the best choice of everybody else that was in the squad. There was really no other question that it was Brett and I that would fill those two spots. And with that, I was confident that we were going to be good enough to do well. And I said, it's all guns blazing, full steam ahead from here, regardless. We'll just do what it takes to try and win in Sydney.
Why Brett? Of course, he was a silver and bronze medalist in the 4,000 metre team pursuit as well. What was it about him that you thought he'd be your best partner?
Well, so for the team pursuit requires a particular type of energy system and power output, which you obviously had in spades. But the Madison, as I said, is a real thinking person's race. So you have to be fast, you have to be strong, but you have to also be very intelligent in that type of racing. And Brett and I were very similar in that regard. Like he might have been slightly stronger and slightly quicker perhaps than me, but I was stronger and quicker than all of our opponents anyway. But we both were smart riders. We knew how to read a race well. If it's like a football player, like a midfield player or a key forward, they can just read the play. They know where the ball's going, or they know where to put themselves to make sure the ball comes towards them. And that's the way I look at it in the Madison. There are riders that can just observe and understand where they need to be and how they can manipulate everybody around them to put themselves in the right position to go for victory. And Brett really had that. Very intelligent rider, and had obviously incredible speed, incredible strength, and for a long period of time had the highest ever recorded VO2 max at the AIS in Canberra. So, and I think that was global as well. So I think it was only maybe 10 years ago or so, a few cross-country skiers were able to score higher VO2 max than Brett Aiken. So he had all of the characteristics and physiology required, which has made it a great combination.
Scott Mcgrory, Olympic gold medalist and renowned cycling commentator, heading to Paris for the 2024 Olympic Games for the host broadcast at Channel 9, is my guest on Dashing Dan's Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans. For the uninitiated, Scott, the Madison looks complicated. Would it be fair to say it's a bit similar to the points race and a bit similar to the 4,000 metre team pursuit, or am I way off the mark there?
Oh, it's similar to the points race. It's that but it's a points race as a relay. Yeah. So that's what makes it really complicated. Is you've got half of the two-man teams, doing, rather than handing over a baton, you're just grabbing each other by the hand and doing a hand sling to throw them in, which in itself is complicated. And it's difficult to do that if you've never done it before. But then once you get the skills, it's almost like dancing on the bike, and it's right. The sling rather than a throw. And it's fun. Like, it's really fun to come off a hand sling. You come in at maybe 40, 45 k's an hour, come off a hand sling and go straight up to 60 to 70 k's an hour, on a velodrome, tight, steep banks. It's really good fun. But as the changeover happens, the person that's going out of the race, that's changing over to their partner, they decelerate as quickly as the rider coming in accelerates. So if you're not concentrating, riding behind that two riders that are about to make a change, you can quickly find yourself running up the back of a rider that's just slowed down in front of you off the back of a change. So that creates crashes, a lot of hectic situations. And then the deeper you go into a race, the more tired the riders will become, then the more concentration is required. And that's when a lot of the crashes happen towards the end, when the lesser riders are unable to concentrate enough and get themselves in tricky situations. And look, at the World Championships last year, I commentated the track events in Glasgow, and the World Championship was run at 59 kilometres per hour average speed.
Wow.
For 50 Ks. It's incredibly fast, and these, they're not in the time trial. You see the like triathlon time trial handlebars for extra aerodynamics. They're on normal track bikes, rear disc wheel. So it's not as if they're in the most aerodynamic positions. It's just the nature of the changeover relay effect and the hand slings has them averaging around 60 Ks an hour for 50 Ks on a velodrome. It's just extraordinary.
I've seen it a couple of times. It not only looks extraordinary, it looks dangerous. Now, World Championships, talking of crashing 2000, Scott, you did crash and you only just qualified. That must have been frightening, A, for crashing, and B, frightening that you nearly missed out on being part of the Olympic Games in an event you were pretty confident you do well in.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was interesting in that so Brett and I, if you go even further forward past the Olympics and a few other events, we didn't race together that often, but we had an incredible strike rate. So we won a World Cup together. We won a big international Madison in Cologne in '99 as well together. We won the Olympics together. We won a couple of Bendigo Madisons, which is the biggest Madison event in Australia. But we didn't actually race that often together. And one of the times that we raced together where we didn't win was those World Championships at '99 as the qualifier for 2000. And we were in the silver medal position with 10 kilometres still to race. It was a 60K race back then, 240 laps. So we'd just done 200 laps, and then he crashed and unfortunately landed on his noggin, split it open, knocked himself out unconscious. And I then had to go into the race on my own and complete the last 10 kilometres. So, going into a relay race for 10 Ks after racing 200 laps and not get dropped, still be able to stay in there, which I was able to do, fortunately. And then the top 14 teams at the World Championships qualified automatically for the Games. And by the end of it all, we went from second down to 13th. So we only just scraped in. However, when I was warming down after that race, I was on the home trainer just warming down, and I saw this years later when I was researching to do a corporate talk and trying to come up with things and what I was going to talk about. And I came across this quote that I gave, and then as soon as I read it, I remembered exactly where I was on the rollers inside the velodrome, just warming down. Brett had gone to hospital, didn't really know his condition at this point, and they said, finished 13th at the Worlds. You qualify for the Games. What does this mean? I said, well, as long as Brett and I are paired together for the Olympics, barring an accident, which is what we just had, barring an accident, we will win gold. And in cycling, you don't say that. Like, you don't typically, if you watch any interview of any cyclist, they don't say before an event that I am going to win this. They always talk themselves down.
Why did you say?
Remember reading it thinking, well, when I reread the quote, I thought, God, you sound like an arrogant twat. But then I remembered the scenario, and it was really just, it was less arrogance. It was more just confidence that I knew that Brett and I were a team that can win. We definitely can win gold. If we don't crash, barring, the roof falling in, we should be able to win. All said and done, we dominated the Games 12 months later.
Did the coaching staff, and in particular the head coach, think that as well? Well, they picked you in the team, so that's obviously a rhetorical question.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I guess he did. I suppose he did. But look, he was also fully focused on what was happening with the team pursuit. That was really his baby, was the team pursuit event, which unfortunately didn't go as well as they were hoping, which Brett was in that team. But, Brett and I were having lots of conversations in the lead up months to the games where he said that he felt more confident about our position in the Madison than he did in the team pursuit. He truly felt that we had a better chance of winning. So he was even doing extra training without telling the coach that was specific for the Madison, outside of what they were doing in the team pursuit. And the Australian team were infamous for the amount of training that they did in the team pursuit. But Brett was then picking himself up and doing extra training on top of that and not telling anyone, just to prepare for the Madison.
So he's going for 2 events. I mean, that would have required a lot of work. He had some issues, which we'll get to now with his daughter, of course, having a very serious illness, which ultimately cost her life in 2011. So that would have been playing on his mind. And then, Scott, sadly for you, well, there was good news at the start. You're going to become a father for the first time to a son, Alexander, and there were complications. So I know it's a long time ago now, but I'm sure it still tugs at your heartstrings. It would have been a very tough time for both of you. How did you get through that? And you must be 2 very mentally strong individuals to get through it and ultimately achieve what you were able to achieve, a gold medal.
Yeah, look, it was incredibly difficult times. And, you see this all the time with any really difficult situation that someone comes into. A lot of people ask, how did you do it? How did you get through that? And it's difficult to answer because you don't know if you can do anything and overcome obstacles unless they're thrown in front of you. And in our case, the World Championships the year before, my partner was pregnant. Alexander was born early in 2000, and after 3 days, they picked up an issue with his heart, and he was transferred from the Royal Women's to the Royal Children's in Melbourne. And he had heart issues that required lots of surgery, and he was only a little tacker, so it was quite difficult. And that was ongoing then for several months. As we're getting deep into that training period now for the Olympics, and I was at war with myself about needing to be in Europe to prepare for the Olympics, but needing to be in Melbourne, where we were based in our off seasons, to be at the hospital with my partner and Alexander. And then at a point where he appeared to be nice and stable, and the doctors were confident that he just really needed to grow a little bit more before they had more surgery, and he'd never left the hospital. He was in ICU the entire time. We made the tough decision for me to go back to Europe and continue training. Otherwise, the Olympics were going to be worthless. I might as well have pulled out of the team had I stayed back here. So it was a really tough call. And I went back to Europe. I'd been there for about a month when I got the phone call to come back because more surgery was required, and the doctor was really nervous about the procedure and what was going to happen. So I flew back and got to Singapore airport knowing the operation had already happened, called my partner to find out how things had gone. And she told me quite bluntly that they nicked a valve in his heart. He went into cardiac arrest. He's on life support, but effectively he's gone. And they don't expect him to make it through the night. Now, I was to get on a plane in Singapore 3 hours later to fly to Melbourne. So even that was in itself was just traumatic, to try and find some privacy in an international airport. And I was a mess. I was just bawling, having heard what had just happened. And then eventually got on the plane, flew to Melbourne, expecting to get to the hospital to a deceased baby. And fortunately, I arrived and had 45 minutes with him before he passed away. So he held on for that long.
Yeah, I'm sorry, mate.
So at least I got to say goodbye. Yeah, that's all okay. So at least I got to say goodbye. And within the next couple of days, and there's no script, there's no one telling you what happens now after a situation like that. So within the next couple of days, I said that it was going to be too difficult to go to the games. I'm just going to give it up. I won't be able to train hard after what had happened. And then plenty of conversations were had, and I was convinced to at least try to go on. And I guess the benefit of hindsight now, it would have been tragic if I hadn't had gone on to the games. Of course, we got to win gold in Sydney, but where would I have been at mentally had I had just given everything up because of that? So you get to the end of that year, would have had nothing at all, and still, my son wasn't going to be with us. So we went back to Europe and continued on. Really difficult times. The training was up and down. It was quite traumatic. Some days I felt unbelievably strong and inspired, and then other days I could do 20 minutes on the bike and go home and cry.
How much did Brett support you? How much did Brett support you, knowing that he was going through his own?
Oh, Brett was good. Yeah. Brett was great. So Brett, now I was living in my place as a professional, in Europe, in Germany, whereas he was with the national team. So we didn't get to see each other very often, but we kept checking in to see how things were going because, his daughter, the year before, only the end of the year before, was diagnosed with Rett syndrome. They were coming to terms with what that meant, very debilitating disease, and so they were dealing with that. Brett seemed to take real inspiration from Ashley, his daughter, and trained unbelievably hard through that whole phase. Whereas I was in a different scenario. I was in a different headspace. I could train really well some days and poorly on others. So I didn't really admit to Brett that I was struggling mentally through that period because I didn't want to upset his confidence. But effectively, my self-doubt really started to creep in because I wasn't training as much as I was hoping to. So by the time I got to Sydney, despite Brett's amazing support and my professional team support and family, friends, everybody were around me as much as possible to help and support me, which was amazing. It's the only reason that I did get to Sydney in the end. But once I did get there, I had this realization that I don't think I've done enough. I think I'm going to let everybody down that had got me to this point. And that really came to a head going into the velodrome. We said our final goodbyes to our families, and then I went into the track and thought, I can't start this race with this mindset. I truly felt that we were going to lose. And I hadn't said anything to Brett. I, again, didn't want to upset his confidence. I just wanted to make sure that he felt. So I was saying all the right things to Brett. I was talking about tactics, what we're going to do, what the other teams are going to do, how do we look out for this and what we're going to do. So he was fully confident that we were in great headspace. And I was a mess. I was an absolute mess. So once I went into the velodrome, I made the decision. And these are one of those really strange things. You don't think about it at the time as much as later when you look back and reflect. But I realized I can't start the race in this headspace. So I picked up my chair, walked away from the compound, sat on my own, and then just gave myself a really strong talking to, just a pep talk as such. Very aggressive with myself about just feeling so bad, so everything's been lost, it's all over, and was able to convince myself that despite all of that, and despite your belief that you haven't trained and prepared enough, let's still give it a crack. So if I put a number on it, I kind of said to myself, I felt like I was at about 80% fitness. So, okay, here's another goal. At 80% fitness, can you still win an Olympic gold medal? Now, that's going to be a great challenge, isn't it? So I'm sort of having this conversation with myself. Well, okay, right. Okay, let's see. You're experienced. You're one of the best riders. You know you are. You were confident last year. None of that has changed. Maybe your fitness is down a little bit. You're going to have to be smart today. How are you going to outthink everybody else? Okay, right, here we go. And then when I went back into the warm-up area, I started warming up, and I still now think back and remember my mindset when I was warming up was that we were going to win, that it didn't matter what had happened and the tragedy that we'd gone through, we were still going to win. And an hour before that, I truly believed that we were going to lose. I woke up that morning and under my breath apologized to Brett in the Olympic Village while he was asleep in his bed. We shared a bedroom. And I woke up before him and looked over. I wasn't sure if he was awake or not. And I just whispered, "I'm sorry, mate." Paused. He didn't say anything. He wasn't awake, but I just felt obliged to apologize to him because I felt that I was going to let him down and he was not going to achieve his Olympic dream. So I said that, which I feel is gutless because I didn't really say it. I wanted to say it, but I didn't really say it to him. But then now we're going onto the start line, and I was truly confident that we were going to be the best there and beat everybody, which is what we did. And we completely dominated, and it was almost like an out-of-body experience, schizophrenic almost, that, it was one person that was defeated and another person that eventually started the race fully confident. And I wasn't at 80%. Look, you can't be at the Olympics. The way we rode, how dominant we were definitely the strongest riders on the track. So, yep, I probably could have been better, but it didn't matter. We were good enough and we got the win. But mindset, it's unbelievable what we can achieve when we really put our focus to it.
Amazing stuff from the great Scott Mcgrory with me on Dashing Gowns Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans. If you're looking to purchase a property, owner-occupied or investment, they're your team. Building a property portfolio, refinancing, debt consolidation, cash out construction, and any loans, whether it be first home loans, equipment loans, car loans, or boat loans. Have you always seen yourself as a mentally strong person like you've just portrayed then? And was there a little angel on your left or right shoulder called Alexander urging you along during that race?
Possibly. Look, early on, mentally strong, yes. I think, it's Newton's law, isn't it? For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. I think it damaged me going through the trauma of Alexander. I didn't deal with that for quite a number of months. So the focus on the Olympics, the ups and downs, losing Alexander, and then after the games, my partner Donna, she said quite aptly, actually, that we thought it was our time to exhale. We've been holding our breath through to the race, and now we can, as parents, just exhale. But we didn't get the chance because, first track gold medal in 16 years, home soil, fantastic achievement. And the Sydney Olympics was just such a special thing for everyone. So media functions, I did the road race a week later. So I was in the road team as well. And then I went immediately into another event. The Herald Sun Tour was on after the Olympics, then back to Europe to start racing the European 6-day scene again. So I was really busy, which felt like a great distraction. But it all came to a head the following January when I was back in Europe on my own for the first time. And I spent a couple of nights at my apartment in Germany in between races. And it was actually the first time where I had spent more than one night alone since Alexandra had passed. And I was a mess. I just broke down. Everything just flooded out. And then I had to pick myself up and go to the next event, which, I won the next race. It was another 6-day event.
Amazing.
And each night I was good on the track. And every time I went to a different event in Europe after the Olympics for that next sort of 12 months, people would come up and congratulate me, friends and colleagues that I hadn't seen. And that was pepping me up all the time. So then I was really good on the track. Then I'd rush back to the hotel each night because I knew I needed to get there to just cry. And I would just break down in the hotel room and cry until my roommate would come back. And I'd hear, his car come in the driveway at the hotel. Okay, cool, compose myself again. Always trying to be strong, not letting anybody know that I was struggling and hurting. And then he'll come in and say, hey, man, gee, you were strong tonight. Yeah, thanks, Eric. Yep, going well. It's all good. Next day, back to the track, strong, riding well, rush back to the hotel, just bawl my eyes out again. And then, got through that week and won. But that up and down over that amount of time really did hurt me. And, I think it cracked me a little bit mentally. And it's been other challenges that have come up since then. And I broke my back in a race and trying to come back from that, and had a glandular fever. And eventually my career ended earlier than I was expecting it to be, because it all just got too hard. It got too hard to get out there and train all the time and do everything that I used to love doing. I think it all sort of came from that. I think it broke me a little bit. And I wasn't able to work as hard as I used to. And then ended up deciding to walk away from it.
And you've got 2 lovely daughters now. You've been given that opportunity, Scott, to be a father again. What's that mean to you?
Oh, they are amazing. So Maddie and Leilani, just amazing young people. And Maddie is 21. She's just spent
Wow.
a season in Whistler, skiing and working like a ski bum over there in
Good on
Canada.
her.
Loving it. She's got a French Canadian boyfriend now, which
Good.
I'm happy about because that keeps her there for a bit longer. She's struggling financially. They don't get paid much, but she's having fun. But I wanted to tough it out. I wanted to
Good.
be there and get through all that adversity and grow and not just give up and come home. And then Leilani, who's 15, just a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful young lady, but just going through her teenage years. So we butt heads all the time.
You're
So
welcome to my world when my daughter was a teenager. Yes.
yeah, so that's the challenge I've got to come up with now is and look, with all of our experience and all the adversity and all the tough times that we've gone through and all the mistakes that we made as teenagers and kids, they don't even see it. They don't care. What would you know, Dad? You were never
Correct.
15. You were born an old man. Okay, yeah, thanks. That's what it's like. So it's a real pleasure. It's such a pleasure to have two beautiful daughters. Yeah.
During the race, going back to the Madison, when did you know you were home? I got an impression, reading a bit about this, that both you and Brett knew you were home pretty early. I suppose the last part of the race, you could just enjoy it, couldn't you, knowing that that gold medal is going to be ours?
Yeah, well, so the way the format was then was every 20 laps, 240 laps, every 20 laps was a sprint for points. And by the time we got to the penultimate sprint, we knew if we got a couple of points in that particular sprint, we would have more than enough points to win. There were double points on the final sprint, so 10 points still for the winner of the team across the final finish line. But as long as we got more than 10 points ahead of second place, then we're unbeatable in terms of points. The only thing that could beat us was a team taking a lap on the field or crashing. Now, every world championship previously, since 1995, I think had been won by a team taking a lap on the field.
Right.
And the year before, Brett crashed. So both scenarios were possible. So once we got enough points in that penultimate sprint to have a winning margin, then it was about defense, just making sure that we're riding safely, nullifying the attacks. And then there was a really dangerous attack that came from Switzerland. They got over a half a lap ahead of the race, the peloton, and we had to then control that. We brought them back. There's about 10 laps to go, 12 laps to go or so, that we realized, okay, they were not going to gain a lap on the field. And in the final 10 laps, with the speed up towards the final sprint, no one was going to be able to gain a lap. It was too late now for any laps to be taken. And at that moment, we knew it was done. So we'd done enough, we would win. And as that happened, I started to think about Alexander and I started to cry. So we're inside the final 10 laps of the Olympic final. And now I'm starting to well up and cry, thinking, well, okay, hang on. The only thing that can stop us now is if we crash. And now I can't see where I'm bloody going because I've got tears in my eyes. Hang on, pull yourself back together. We've got to get to the line first. And then I just focused again on the last few laps. And then when you cross the line at the end, as euphoria, we're just ecstatic. So just that roller coaster of emotions of being in the zone, trying to win, trying to be better, getting to the point where we can't be beaten now. And then everything else just sort of tumbles in on top of you, thinking about how hard, it is to lose a child, but then having to push that aside again. And then all I wanted to do was just get to the fence. I just wanted to see my family, just wanted to see my partner and just celebrate that moment. And again, and exhale, just be grieving parents for a little while.
You mentioned a bit earlier, Scott, that people told you that you need to go back and after the death of Alexander and get ready for the Olympics. Was there a specific person who said to you, come on, you're that close. I know this is tough, but you've got an opportunity here?
Yeah. That was my partner, Donna. Going through obviously the same grief, the same challenges, and perhaps even more so. Being a mother, but she was the one that said, no, you go back. So I think she thought if you don't do it, again, you get to the end of the year and Alexander's still not going to be with us and you won't have gone to the Olympics. And this is something that I would probably then regret for the rest of my life. So at least let's just go back and try. Now, it may have been, yes, that, but also her wanting a distraction as well. Like, let's get back to Europe. Let's get back to where we've been living for the last bunch of years. and into our regular routine again. And then it would give her something to do to help, me every day, on this path. So it could have been a bit of both. But I'm glad she did. She had that courage to convince me to turn it around.
Now, the Swiss, of course, finished second, and there was an Australian in their ranks, Matthew Gilmore. So was that an advantage or a disadvantage to have him in that team, because he missed out on the Australian team and he decided, well, I'm going to jump ship and go to another country. The Swiss have welcomed him with open arms, and he's done a great job to get a silver medal. So was it a help or a hindrance?
Well, it was Belgium. He was running for
Belgium, I should say. Belgium. My apologies.
The Swiss were the last big attack, but the Belgians. Right. So they won the final sprint, which gave them the 10 points. I think they jumped from 4th to 2nd in that final sprint.
Yeah.
And what had happened with him is, so Matthew Gilmore, and he rode with Etienne de Wilde, a Belgian guy. But Matt was born in Ghent, in Belgium. So his father, Graham, was one of that previous generation of 6-day riders. So he was a star in the type of racing that both Matthew and I became pretty good at ourselves. So Matt was born in Belgium. Now, he was in that original squad in 92 for the Olympic Games that I missed out on. So he was in the original cull down to 8 riders, but then he was then the next one to go. So he didn't go to the 92 Games. And within the next period, that same national coach told him that that he's not good enough to ride international level team pursuit, but he's good at racing the Tasmanian Christmas carnivals, which is where he's from. So he should just go back and Tassie carnivals. Now, this is a guy that had a father that was one of the world's best and had true ambition, was a brilliant bunch race rider. So the Madison points race, these sorts of events. And he thought, well, no, I'm better than that. I don't want to just go back and ride local races. I've got more ambition than that. So he then looked into the fact that he was born in Belgium and whether the Belgians would be interested in taking him on board. And they jumped at the opportunity. The first World Championships that he rode for Belgium, he won the Madison along with Etienne de Wilde. So he became some world champion. This is 1998 now, so we moved forward a few years from then. But so someone that was told that wasn't good enough to be a part of the Australian team went on to be a world champion in another discipline within the sport.
And of course, his partner was 42, wasn't he?
Extraordinary. So that's quite old. Yeah, quite old for cycling, but just an experienced, crafty rider. So really smart, really intelligent, and obviously still physically good enough to get the job done. And it wasn't having him there. Didn't help or hinder. So he was just an opponent. We knew Matt really well. He wanted to beat us. We wanted to beat him. No quarter was given. And, on the day we were the better team. I certainly feel for him in that he became a world champion for another country. He got a silver medal at the Olympic Games for another country. Now, had he stayed within the Australian program, then it may have been Brett or I that may have missed out, or, the three of us fighting for 2 spots. So it made it easier for us that we didn't have to have that level of competition between the 3 of us, and we're all good friends.
Good.
I certainly feel for Matt and his scenario, somewhat similar to mine in that I didn't get to 92 or 96, whereas he had to change countries to have another go and then proved himself right. So he did really well.
Do you think coaches are less old school than the Australian cycling coach in the 90s and early 2000s? I mean, he obviously had a plan he thought would work. It didn't work as well as you would have liked, no doubt. And you either liked him or you didn't like him, but they seem to have changed a lot, haven't they? Coaches in all disciplines, in all sports, especially at an elite level.
Yeah, absolutely. They have. And that was a different time, and I certainly don't criticize the training. And we had, by today's standards, we were doing training that actually doesn't make any sense. But we didn't know that. They didn't know that. It was all an experiment. We're all trying new things, different things. And we were doing far more in certain areas that we should have been doing, which was probably more detrimental to our performance. But we didn't know. So I don't criticize that with the benefit of hindsight. Not at all. The challenge with a modern day coach now is it's still an elite sport, right? It's still incredibly difficult, and there's no fairness in sport. Just because you're a nice guy doesn't mean you get to win. You have to want it more. You have to ride harder, train harder, work harder at whatever it is in your sport and discipline. And fairness doesn't come into it at all. So it's difficult to be, I think it might be quite difficult to be a modern coach when a lot of people perhaps want a bit more fairness, but that's not elite sport. You know, in the working world, in school environment, that's a bit different, but not when it comes to elite sport. But there's more buy-in now from the athlete. So rather than be a dictatorship, you're doing this because I tell you to, which had been said with some pretty strong words to some of the athletes that I was close to by previous coaches. It's now more about the athlete and understanding the athlete has to have buy-in and empowering them to understand why you're doing particular training, what system it's going to train, how it's going to benefit you. And then once they agree to that, and they have much more buy-in, you know, and they go out and do the sessions because they know what they're getting out of it and how much better they'll be. Whereas in the past, you just did what you were told. And I just don't think you were doing, we probably didn't train as hard as we could have because we didn't quite understand. We were just doing it by the whip. Do it or you're kicked out. And that was the old East German system. That was the old Soviet system. Yeah. It worked. You know, if you had enough eggs to throw against the wall, eventually a couple won't break and they'll win you something. But the damage at the bottom of the wall is too great for a Western country like Australia to put up with, and that's something you don't have to do anymore. I think it's much fairer in the way athletes are worked with these days in an environment that's not fair.
Scott Mcgrory is my guest. He's an Olympic gold medalist in the Madison in 2000. Scott, after 2008, they got rid of the Madison and now it's come back. How disappointed were you that it was dropped after 3 Olympic Games? But you no doubt that it's back now.
Absolutely, I am. Absolutely, I am. And little story, I have it on reasonable authority that at the Games in 2008, Tony Blair, former PM, British PM, was sitting with Bernie Ecclestone in the velodrome watching the Madison, and Bernie got up to leave and Tony asked him where he was going. He said, "I don't understand what's happening. Too confusing," and left. And then that filtered down to the IOC and they said, "Oh, okay, the Madison must be too confusing." So and if you're an ignorant old man from a different sport, then it's too hard to understand. So they made the decision to take it out.
Really? Because of that?
Yeah. That's maybe do some research on it, but I'm pretty sure that was the conversation that was had. So they took it out, and then now it's come back, and it's like anything, right? If you've got good commentators, they can explain what's going on. If you're trackside and you can really, you know, with good commentary, you understand it. Once you understand, it's an incredibly fascinating race. It looks a bit messy. It looks a bit all over the place. But once you really know what's happening out there, it's intriguing. It's super difficult, really hard, takes a lot of skill. But that's allegedly why it was dropped from the program for 2012. And then, was it 2012? Yeah.
It was. And also 2016. Yep.
16, yep. But now it's back, which is fantastic. So, and we didn't have a women's Madison. So 2000 when we started, 2000, 2004, 2008, the women's Madison. So now that it's come back, we have full parity. And we have a real chance for the Australians. I think it's our best chance for the female track cyclists is in the Madison itself. They're silver medalists at the World Championships last year. There's a real chance they could win the gold this time around.
And who's that? Excuse my ignorance. That can win
Alex Manley and Georgia Baker. Yeah, Georgia Baker and Alex Manley. They got second at the Worlds, so they're a real chance to be on the podium this time.
Just on that, how do you think Australia will go in the track cycling and also the road cycling? We've had success over the years. We've had some surprise successes. I know 1992 will go down as a great memory in the women's road race. Seeing what Kathy Watt did, she probably didn't obey instructions, Scott, as we know. I think that's very well known, but she surprised everyone, including Jenny Longo, who was the red-hot favourite and thought she'd won it. Everyone had forgotten about the little girl from Gippsland, 5'1" she was, Kathy, and had blitzed the field. But have we got anyone that could surprise? And in general, other than, of course, Georgia and her partner in the Madison, have we got others that you expect to do well?
Well, so I'm commentating road track, BMX, and mountain bike. Yep. And if I was to rank all of those disciplines in order of best chance, I would go to BMX. So BMX is our best chance for medals. Freestyle BMX, we've got the defending champion in Logan Martin. He'll be back. So he's a real chance for a medal. Perhaps he can defend his title. And BMX racing, we have Saya Sakakibara, who is last year and this year's World Cup winner, overall winner. Didn't have a great World Championships last weekend, but I think that's not bad. I think that'll give her a bit more fire in the belly to get it right for the Olympics. She has the consistency if everything goes her way, which often doesn't in BMX, unfortunately. But she's certainly good enough to be the gold medalist. When it gets to track cycling, medals certainly on the card. I don't think we're going to get a big haul of medals. Best chance is in the men's sprint discipline. So the team sprint, we were world champions 2 years ago, silver medalist last year. So we should be in the medals. What colour? We don't know. It should be against us and the Netherlands for gold in the men's team sprint. And Matthew Richardson in both the sprint and the keirin is a real chance of medals. Perhaps not the outright favourite in the sprint, but certainly on the podium, I think. And in the keirin, anything can happen. That's one of those races that as long as you make the final, you've got a chance. So if Richo can get into the final, then he's a chance of getting on the podium. Road races, men's and women's, really tough for us this time because we only have 3 riders in both road races for the men and women. So that really limits our options. Michael Matthews, good chance, though, for the men. And I think it's Grace Brown in the time trial is a really good chance on the road. So she was 4th last time at the Olympics in the time trial. So I think she's good enough to get on the podium this time around.
Now, you're based in Bendigo. Why is Bendigo such a great cycling city? It's got a wonderful velodrome that you've been heavily involved in for a long time.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Country town that has a great heritage. And if you go way, way back, every country town had a bike track, not a beautiful, pristine indoor velodrome, but some kind of flat track around the footy oval or cricket oval. And they've sort of diminished a little bit over the years, and the club scene isn't like it used to be. But Bendigo seems to have held on to a pretty strong tradition within cycling, and they've got a funny shaped track, outdoor track here. It still has, they still have races every Thursday night, and the Bendigo Madison is still continuing. It was back for the first time since the pandemic this year, which is great. And the beauty of maybe going through one set of traffic lights, you're out of town, and that's it. No more traffic lights for the rest of the ride. That helps. And I guess success breeds success. You've got to, whether it's success in terms of Olympic level or international level, or just the fact that you've got lots of group rides, lots of riders in this town, that more people keep coming through it. Like I've seen so many young kids coming into the bunch rides in Bendigo whose fathers were riding, years and years and years ago. So, that's the next generation that are coming through, and the third generation coming through. And that's just kept it alive. It's a really good traditional cycling town. Yeah. And I'm not from here originally. I married into Bendigo.
Yep.
But I come from the Wodonga region originally. I grew up on the Gold Coast as a teenager, and then moved everywhere, Adelaide to Europe to America to all over. And now I'm here. But I am the last of my immediate family to be back in Victoria. They've all moved, either stayed on the Gold Coast or relocated back to the Gold Coast.
Yeah.
So I'm back there quite a bit, actually. And especially now that we're starting to get into winter, I'll be back on the Gold Coast as much as I possibly can before we go to Paris, because it's starting to get bloody cold down here. It's
not as cold in Bendigo as it is in Kyneton, where my family is, or would end on the way through to Bendigo from Melbourne. But it is pretty cold. You certainly have your moments. Now, we're here for Aussie Home Loans, and you can purchase a property. You can build a property portfolio through Aussie Home Loans. You can do some refinancing, debt consolidation, and any sort of loans as well. Now, Scott Mcgrory, I need to ask you, we spoke about Australia's chances. Netherlands or Great Britain, probably likely to be the best teams overall, or the best countries overall, especially in track cycling.
Yeah. Look, Great Britain, they were inspired by our Australian Institute of Sport. I mean, we touched on that earlier on. Yeah. So they were in their lottery funding that came into their sport program was kind of based off what we had been doing back. And wow, since that came in, so 2004 was the first time that they started to get some success. And then 2008, since then, in track cycling in particular, they have just dominated the Olympic Games. And not so much at the World Championships in between. And this has been a real key to their strategy, which is a little bit different to ours. Our funding often was about every 12 months, making sure that we have to do well at the World Championships each year. Whereas the British, they focus purely on every 4-year Olympic cycle. So they would have some riders like the great, Jason Kenny, who's the greatest medal-winning Olympian from Great Britain, and the best ever medal haul from cycling. And sometimes he wouldn't even be that competitive at a World Championships, but he'd come back out and win a gold medal at the Olympics every 4 years. So every time we get towards an Olympic cycle, I get nervous about Great Britain. And if you look at the men's team pursuit team in particular, who both women have dominated, the women have been more consistent throughout World Championships, but the men have dropped off over the last couple of years, but they're back. They are absolutely back, and they were very good at the Worlds last year. They've got a plethora of riders to choose from. So I'm really worried about how well Great Britain's going to go this year in Paris. And in the sprint disciplines, it is the Netherlands. Harry Leverdason is just a machine. He's won the World Championship in the sprint for the last 5 years straight. And I just can't see anyone that's going to beat him. I hope Matthew Richardson gets the better of him. And Richo is getting better every year. So he should be going in the right trajectory. I hope he's there early enough to beat Harry this time. But yeah, they're the two nations that'll probably give us the most trouble. And it'll be interesting to see if the Italians, they can repeat their success in the team pursuit. And they've got a couple of guys that are, superstars of road cycling. Filippo Ganna, Jonathan Milan. Milan has won a couple of stages at the Tour of Italy, the Giro d'Italia that's on right now. So they've got some guys that are the superstars on the road that are still coming back to the track for their team pursuit. So they'll be pretty tough to beat as well.
Who are you broadcasting with? I've got a question on your former co-commentator in just a minute. Of course, she can't because she's the chef de mission, which I think is a magnificent appointment. But is Phil Liggett involved, the great man?
Yeah, it's interesting. So for the road, we've got Phil Liggett and Cadel Evans with myself.
Yes.
So 3 of us, and Cadel hasn't commentated at this level before, so it's the first time for him.
He'll be great.
On the track, it's myself and Kate Bates, 2007 World Points Race champion and Commonwealth Games champ.
Great.
Kate and I have done a lot together, Track Nations Cup, and we do the national championships for Oz Cycling every year. Then on BMX, it's Caroline Buchanan, so our former superstar from BMX that's drifted away from that sport to be more of a mountain bike focus. But she'll be fantastic, great talent. And Cadel's going to join me back to his roots on the mountain bike. So that's where he started. He and I are going to be doing the mountain bike together. And
how's the research going? There's plenty of it, isn't there?
Yeah, well, actually, I was in the middle of doing some just before we started this. So just going through all the different disciplines, and now's the time for me to really get into it and focus and rewatch. I was watching the BMX World Championships on the weekend, and I'll go through and watch a few more of those races and start making phone calls, getting some insight tips on people. I don't like to, like always, you might do 10 lots of stats on something or someone and use 3.
Correct.
I don't want to. Yeah, I don't want to bore people with just stats. It's not about that. It's the right moment, something that's appropriate, something that can connect the audience with a person to make it a bit more human and get more involved and understand why they would like to see this person do well, or explain why they are so good. I try to make that connection. So I'll be looking for some quirky things. I always try and get a movie reference or two where I can.
You got a favourite movie, Scott?
Oh no, plenty of favourites, but not a particular favourite. I know at the Winter Olympics, commentating with Stephen Bradbury, there was one skater whose surname was Gilmore, and in his nicknames, one of his nicknames was Happy Gilmore. So, of
course,
I threw in there. He's about to come out and do his skate, and got had to Steve. And obviously, Happy Gilmore, the movie, is one of Bradbury's favourite movies, because I said, look, if Rod Schneider was here, he would say, "You can do it," which was, one of the famous lines. And Schneider, in all of Adam Sandler's movies, he's that, Spanish accent guy saying, "You can do it." pops up in all these movies, right? So as soon as I said it, just I didn't say put on the Spanish accent, and Bradbury he's like, oh yeah, and then he started going fully Spanish, oh, you can do it, you can, and just he loved it. He absolutely loved it. And I thought to myself, oh, if anyone wants to have a go at him or us for a racial slur and putting on an accent, so well, it'll be to Bradbury, not me. I'll be okay.
Of course.
Yeah.
You be the straight man. The commentator's meant to be the straight man and the expert. He or she can do whatever they like. Now, you've ridden against some magnificent cyclists over the years. You've ridden with some magnificent cyclists. You've seen some of the best. Where does the great Anna Meares rate in your eyes?
Oh, well, look, Anna, in terms of female track cyclists, she is at the very top. So she's the best. And if you want to break it down overall, then it gets more complicated. But look, Anna, the thing about Anna as well is the performance is one thing. Okay, that's clear. You can just rattle that stat off, and I think 11 times or 10 or 11 times world champion, 2 Olympic Games gold medals. Great. Yep, she's up there with the best of all time. But the way she carries herself, the way she speaks, even when we did the commentary together in Tokyo, she did road and BMX with me. Now, she did do BMX as a kid, but she approached it so well, so professionally. She spoke eloquently. And then I'm not surprised. I'm disappointed in some regard because she's not going to Paris as a Channel 9 commentator with me. But she's going there, of course, as the chef de mission, as you mentioned. But I'm not surprised. She does that role so well. And having dealt with her quite a bit over the last sort of 2 years or so, she really has done it professionally and as she would as an athlete. So she has embraced it. And look, I think they should be locking her in for the next couple, at least through to Brisbane 32, because she's doing a fantastic role in that position as chef de mission, which is not surprising to me at all.
Well, she's an absolute great, as he is. Scott, it's been an absolute pleasure hearing about your journey. Bronze medalist in 1988, gold medal under extreme circumstances in 2000. You're now one of the great commentators. We look forward to hearing you and watching you at the Paris Olympics. We wish the Australian team all the best. And we thank you for joining us on Dashing Down's Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans. And they can deal with anyone in Australia. They've got clients in every state and every capital, and they do Zoom as well. Travel well, enjoy all your research. And as I say, can't wait to watch and listen to you call a lot of gold medals for Australia in the cycling, in the BMX, in the mountain biking, and also in the road races. Good luck.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. It's a pleasure, mate. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.